Well, hello everybody, it's me and my beautiful wife, Kara, and let's do this.
You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its saltiness, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet.
Okay, I seen a really good teaching a long time ago, and this is about Israel. You know, the thing I learned was salt never loses its saltiness unless you add it to water, stuff like that. But the salt itself never loses its saltiness. So how can salt lose its saltiness if it just doesn't? And then he said, if it does lose its saltiness, it's no good, and it just needs to be left to be trampled on by man. Here's the secret, y'all, and this is deep. Now salt is huge, especially back in Israel and the eastern places, Iraq, all that. Salt was a main commodity because they could use it to store their food, to sterilize, all this different stuff. Salt was it wasn't cheap to buy salt. Salt, you can make really good money if you knew where to get the salt and collect it and then sell it. And so everybody was buying salt all the time. But some people, they would have salt, and then they would take half of the salt. They would, let's just say they're going to sell a quart of salt. They would they'd put either a half quart or less salt in there, then they'd fill it back up with the same color sand. So what you're really getting is you're getting salt with sand in it.
Ew.
Yes. Then the people go home thinking they got a whole quart of salt. They go home, they make their food, and they put it on their food. And salt will dissolve or crunch. Sand is like glass, y'all. It's not going nowhere. You put it on your food, you just ruin your food because you can't eat food with sand in it. So what would they do? They'd go outside and dump this, what was supposed to be salt, even if it had some in it, onto the street because the streets were made of sand. And they would dump it on there so that men could walk all over it. It's just trash. So why not throw it in the street that's probably got some of the same sand that's mixed in with this salt?
Do you know why they put salt on the ground? Because it would kill the plants. So it would basically create a roadway.
Yes. So the only use for it was whatever little salt that was in there could be used to keep the plants down. So when you realize that the way you lose your saltiness is to put sand in with it. Without that, you'll never lose your saltiness. Now, what our Messiah was saying is you are the salt of the earth, which is also white or pink, and probably other colors. I'm just guessing on the first two. I mean, I know the first two, but I'm sure there's all kinds of different colored salt. But he says you are the salt of the earth. But if you lose your saltiness, if you gain too much world in you, if you walk away from his path and you start doing like the world, that's like adding sand into you. And there will come a point to where there's more sand and salt, and you no longer have the saltiness that you once had. And then it says, you're no good for nothing but to, you're no good for nothing. but then he's saying that salt is only good to be trampled on by man. Now, that's even more significant because it's usually by men or the world, men and the world and women, that we get sidetracked and we start following the world. We start doing what the world says, and then we get to the point to where we don't want to follow our Messiah because he says don't do all this stuff in the world. And so if we get to the point where we have more world in us than his salt, then there's a possible chance we could be doomed. When I come to that revelation, I was like, whoa, that means that those who are saved or accept him into their heart and follow him, if they still continue to be worldly and they don't back out of the world, they can lose their saltiness. Now, I do know that the Father, he brings us back over and over, so I'm not saying this to scare any of y'all, but I am saying that if you can't give up the world, You know, if you can't walk away from partying, from sexual immorality, from adultery, from watching, movies that all they do is curse God, watching movies that promote sex sex outside of marriage, letting your children do this, living with people and you're not married but you're having relations, things like this can, get us to the point where we have lost our holy saltiness. So how do you not lose your saltiness? You stay in His pure word and you meditate on Him and you do as He did. You not just keep His law, but you want to pray for the fruits of the Ruach: patience, kindness, slow to anger, brotherly, sisterly love. What was you going to say? Same thing?
Yeah, same thing. Twin moment.
Twin moment. That's right. So when we realize that, this is why He says, if you're a friend with the world, you're an enemy to Him. But look at what the world has for us. They have celebrities, which is what I call fallen stars, or the opposite of stars of light. And you see them on there, they're promoting Satanism, they're doing seances, they're dressing halfway naked, they're trying to cause us men to lust. And then on top of it, they're extraordinarily beautiful, whether it's TV magic or they just are. They use music, Satan's, favorite tool. And not just that, but, TV, we get to watching all these different TV shows. Even if they're not bad, if they're taking all of our time away from the Father, then in that sense it is bad. So I really feel in my heart that we need to keep the saltiness. We need to keep ourselves salty, true, with the fruits of the Ruach, with love and encouragement. Let's salt one another with His word. I'm gonna walk over and I'm just gonna throw salt all over y'all's heads. I mean, just like, you need it. Open your eye. No, I'm just joking. But you got something to say?
Yeah, and well, what's interesting is in the law, in the Torah, it says that sacrifices were to be seasoned with salt.
Mm-hmm.
So there's definitely a connection there between our serving the Father, making sacrifices of praise and obedience, and all this has to be seasoned with salt. It can't be seasoned with sand.
Which is so important. So, so now that I see that one little scripture, it's just one little verse, that, buddy, is it powerful. He's saying, don't let too much world come in. You have to. Now, like I said, I'm not saying to y'all, if you're living in the world, you're doomed. No. But you have to come to a point to where you want to serve Him and you decide to be set apart. You decide that He is who you want. And when you do, buddy, He will bless you. He will make Himself known. I've heard Him talk in my mind. I don't ever say, I heard so saith the Lord, but just like today, I heard Him tell me to go to the same convenient care and then what time to go. So I just did what I heard in my mind and it went perfect. We called 2 hours later and they said there's an hour wait. We went there at 2, we got in there within 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Only one person, like you said, ahead of us.
Yeah.
So He is so good to us, y'all. So, for those of y'all who come on a little later, what I was saying was, go ahead and read that scripture one more time, but use the word saltiness again.
Matthew 5:13. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its saltiness, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet.
Yes, trampled on by men. So, in that, salt was so important, and it was used for a lot of things. So people who were selling salt made a lot of money. And some of the dealers were crooked. And they would take sand that looks just like the salt, and they'd put most of the quart full of sand, and then put a tiny little bit of salt on top. So when they taste it, it tastes good. Then they take home this salt, and then when they start using it, they get to the sand, they realize that this is just white sand, and it cannot be used. And since the salt has been mixed into it, it is now useless, because nobody wants to have sand on their food. Sand doesn't dissolve, it doesn't crunch, it aggravating. Crunch, you're like, oh, and then you got to
Ugh.
rinse your mouth out because
Yeah.
you have it in there.
Like having dirt in your mouth.
So what the whole point that I feel like the Father is saying is, if you let the world into yourself too much, it's like adding sand. We are the saltiness of the world, but if we add too much world in us, we're adding sand. And then eventually we lose our saltiness. We lose who we are because it's so easy to do when you're in the world. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and jump off, y'all. So with that, we're going to say, let's do this.
Love y'all.
That's right, all of us. Let's do this.
Yeah.